There's a kind of exhaustion most men don't talk about. It's not the kind you get from working late or lifting too much. It's the kind that sinks into your chest after giving too much of yourself to someone who didn't ask, didn't notice, and maybe never even cared. It's the weight of performing for love, smiling when you felt hollow, staying when your soul was already walking away. And it's not about her. It's about that invisible fear that if you stopped giving, stopped proving, stopped fixing, you'd be left. Not just left by her, left by love, by meaning, by worth. You didn't do it for attention. You did it to delay abandonment, to feel chosen, to make the pain of rejection wait one more day. But deep down, you felt it, the erosion. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet moments where your words felt lighter, your presence felt optional, and your own voice stopped sounding like you. That's the real cost. Not the fatigue of effort, but the loss of something deeper, your presence, your power, your peace. Zeno of Citium knew something about losing everything. The founder of Stoicism didn't begin his path through enlightenment or comfort. He began when his ship sank. Literally, he was left with nothing, left with no wealth, no position, no certainty. And in that emptiness, walking the streets of Athens alone, he found something most men never dare touch: philosophy born from ruin. This list isn't about tactics to keep a woman. It's not about rejection. It's about returning to your own feet, to your own code, to the man you were before you gave that away. Seneca once said, "He who is everywhere is nowhere." It applies not just to ambition, but to emotion. When your energy is stretched trying to please, trying to perform, trying to protect someone else's peace, you lose your own. You evaporate, not all at once, but in small, silent evaporations of presence. A nod when you wanted to say no, a text sent with a hand that didn't want to type, a truth swallowed to keep the mood safe. But this isn't about blaming her. It never was. It's about naming the moments you disappeared, trying to be enough. The times you betrayed your own stillness. The days you turned your dignity into a discount just to feel chosen. This list is not a manual for manipulation. It's a mirror for the man who gave too much, stayed too long, explained too often, and now stands at the edge of something raw and holy. The decision to come back to himself. What follows are not rules. They're reminders of what a strong man never does. Not out of pride, but out of peace. Not to punish her, but to protect what's sacred within himself. This isn't revenge, it's return. And if you've ever given more than you should have, you'll feel it. Not in your mind, but in your bones. Let's begin. There's a moment every man remembers. Not because it was loud, but because it was empty. You said something honest. She looked confused, maybe annoyed, and instead of standing in your truth, you started explaining, softening, clarifying, justifying. You weren't trying to lie. You were trying to be understood. But what you didn't see then was how each word chipped away at something sacred, your frame, your ground, your authority. You believed that explaining yourself built connection, that if she could just see your heart clearly, she'd respect it more. But that's not how it works. Every clarification, no matter how sincere, tells her the same silent message. My truth depends on your approval. And that message doesn't bring closeness. It brings doubt. Not because she's cruel, but because boundaries, once questioned, lose their shape. A man who constantly explains doesn't sound more honest. He sounds unsure. There's a reason people trust silence more than persuasion. There's a reason the strongest leaders speak less. It's not about being cold. It's about being clear. Stoicism teaches this. Presence doesn't need validation. And your peace? It was never meant to be a public discussion. You don't owe anyone access to your internal process. Not even the woman you love. Especially not when that access becomes a negotiation. Think back. How many times did you try to explain your tone, your past, your silence, your exhaustion? And how many times did it lead to peace? More often, it led to confusion, to conflict, to a man unraveling his center just to be seen. And the truth is, the more you explain, the less she feels you. A strong man doesn't explain his soul. He lives it, calmly, fully, without apology, because the ones who truly see him won't need the extra words, and the ones who demand them were never listening anyway. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from fear or withdrawal. It comes from strength, from presence, from knowing that your energy is no longer up for negotiation. Modern men are told to communicate more, to open up, to explain. But sometimes the most masculine thing you can do is say nothing at all, not as a tactic, not as punishment, but as recognition. This doesn't need your words. It needs your stillness. You've probably felt it before. In the middle of an argument that went nowhere, in the heat of emotional chaos that begged for a reaction, you spoke, trying to calm it, to clarify, to fix. But all it did was feed the fire, because not every storm is meant to be understood. Some are meant to pass through, and the man who survives them is the one who doesn't stand in the rain trying to rearrange the clouds. He just closes the door and waits. Epictetus warned not to argue with the ignorant, not because they're unworthy, but because it changes nothing. That applies in love, too. Some moments don't need closure. They don't need defense. They need distance. And silence gives you that, not as a retreat, but as a shield. In neuroscience, silence softens the mirror neurons that escalate conflict. In spirit, silence reclaims your focus. It says, I see what's happening, but I choose not to bleed for it. You are not cold for going quiet. You are not weak for refusing to engage. You are simply no longer performing emotional customer service. You no longer trade your presence for peace that doesn't exist. Silence is your line, your anchor, your way of saying, I know who I am, and I don't have to explain it, defend it, or deliver it to anyone who tries to shake it. True silence isn't absence. It's a presence so grounded that no chaos can move it. And in that space, a man finds what noise never gave him, clarity. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't betrayal. It wasn't even loud. It was subtle. The way she stopped making eye contact when you spoke. The way her body leaned slightly away instead of in. The way her laughter lost its warmth. You didn't notice it at first because you were still trying, still showing up, still giving. But respect doesn't leave with a shout. It leaves with a slow, invisible fade, and by the time you saw it, it had already been gone for a while. Most men don't lose respect in war. They lose it in peace, in the small moments where they abandon themselves to keep the connection alive, where they nod when they should walk, where they say yes just to avoid another cold shoulder. Every one of those moments carves a crack in the foundation, until eventually she's no longer looking at you. She's looking through you, not with anger but with absence. You were the man who always said yes, until nothing you said mattered, because when you stop standing in your own truth, she stops believing there's anything solid left to stand on. And here's the part that hurts. She didn't have to ask you to give yourself away. You did it, slowly, silently, because you thought love meant sacrifice. But when sacrifice becomes your identity, respect dies in its shadow. You thought staying was strength, that enduring was noble. But strength isn't in how much you tolerate. It's in what you refuse to betray within yourself. And once a woman feels that you'll bend your frame for her comfort, something shifts, not always cruelly, sometimes without even knowing it. But the shift is real. She stops trusting your center, because you've shown her it can be moved. Quiet strength doesn't chase. It doesn't convince. It doesn't perform. It stands. It watches. It listens. And it remembers that respect begins, not with her, but with the man in the mirror. The one who decides whether he's still worth returning to. There's a moment after abandonment that feels like drowning. You don't panic right away. You reach. You plead. You retrace the moments, trying to understand where it cracked, where she drifted, what you could have done differently. And in that space, most men make the same quiet mistake. They turn the pain into a performance. They try to win her back. They forget to come back to themselves. You weren't left because you lacked charm. You weren't discarded because you didn't try hard enough. You were left because somewhere along the way you stopped leading yourself. You moved from being a man with presence to being a man with propositions. Look what I'll change. Look what I'll fix. Look what I'll do. But a man who performs for love is not standing in love. He's chasing an echo, and chasing costs more than leaving ever did. Trying to reclaim her attention feels noble at first, like you're fighting for what matters. But there's a line between love and self-abandonment, and when crossed, even your good intentions start to betray you. Because if your value can only be seen through her reaction, then your identity is already gone. You've handed the mirror of who you are to someone who's walking away, and now you wait for her to give it back. She won't. She can't. It's not hers to hold. Stoicism doesn't teach you to harden. It teaches you to return, to ask the only question that matters in the wreckage. Who am I without her reaction? If you don't know, then that's where the work begins. Not in winning, Not in explaining, not in hoping, but in rebuilding, quietly, alone, with dignity. The man she might have respected is the one who doesn't need her to see it anymore. The man who doesn't run toward the door she closed, but toward the man who forgot how to stand. That's the man who doesn't chase. That's the man who returns to himself. You didn't call it begging. You called it needing answers. You told yourself it was about respect, about ending things right. But deep down, you weren't looking for truth. You were looking for confirmation that you mattered, that the time, the effort, the nights you stayed, the days you held space, meant something. And when she didn't offer that clarity, it shattered something fragile you hadn't realized you were still holding. The belief that love, even when it ends, should honor you. But most endings don't honor. They fade. And what you call closure is often just a final attempt to be seen, to have your pain acknowledged, to make your love feel real one last time. Yet in that plea, in that quiet reaching, you lose something even more important than clarity. You lose yourself. Zeno didn't respond to mockery. He didn't plead to be understood. His silence wasn't a wound. It was a weapon. It wasn't passive. It was principled. Because there's a kind of dignity that rises when you stop arguing with absence, when you stop asking the person who left you to repair what they broke. Closure doesn't come from her words. It comes from your boundary. From the moment you decide that your worth will no longer be a question handed to someone else. From the second you realize that the woman who walked away is not the one responsible for what you become after she's gone. A strong man doesn't beg for closure. He doesn't chase final words or clean endings. He accepts the silence, and in that silence, he listens, not for her voice, but for his own. Because emotional freedom begins not when you find the right words, but when you stop outsourcing your peace to people who were never meant to hold it. There's a difference between being unavailable and being cold. One is a mask, the other is a decision. Emotional non-availability isn't a tactic. It's not about playing games or punishing someone with distance. It's about recognizing when your emotional investment has become a drain instead of a connection. A man who continues to pour into what no longer holds him is not generous. He's bleeding. Strong men don't stop feeling. They stop leaking. They stop handing out pieces of their soul to situations that have shown no capacity to respect them. And when that moment arrives, when he realizes the ground he's been watering is dry, he doesn't rage. He doesn't explain. He simplifies, quietly, decisively, like a man who knows his value no longer lives in how much he gives, but in where he chooses to remain rooted. There's a metaphor you've lived, even if you didn't have the words for it, watering a dying tree, just because it once had fruit, hoping it will bloom again, waiting for it to remember what it once gave. But hope without discernment becomes delusion, and eventually, a man must choose. Keep feeding what's fading or protect the soil of his own peace. Your emotional energy is not infinite. Neuroscience tells us attention is chemical currency. Every thought, every reaction, every conversation costs you. And if you spend it on what does not nourish you, you go bankrupt. Not visibly, not instantly, but spiritually, slowly, until you wake up in a life where nothing grows, and you can't remember the last time you felt full. Being emotionally unavailable isn't hardness, it's honesty. It's the quiet line you draw when you finally understand that not everyone deserves access to your heart, that your depth is not a product, that your stillness is not a service, and that the man who honors his own boundaries doesn't push people away. He reveals who was never meant to stay. There comes a point where responding isn't strength, it's surrender, not to her, but to the old version of you that still believes peace must be earned through dialogue. You've done that before. Typed long messages trying to be understood, explained your absence, justified your silence, and every time you sent that final thought, that closing line, you felt a little smaller, not because your words weren't true, but because they weren't needed, and deep down, you knew it. Not every message deserves a reply. Not every question deserves clarity. Sometimes silence isn't avoidance, it's authority. A man doesn't owe a performance to anyone who interrupts his peace. The moment you stop responding just to prove you're kind, or fair, or emotionally available, you step back into your own gravity. And that stillness, that refusal to be dragged into every emotional rehearsal, is where your dignity returns. Seneca once wrote, "It is not that life is short, but that we waste it." The same can be said of your energy. How much of it have you wasted trying to resolve what was meant to end? How many arguments did you stretch just to avoid the silence that might have set you free? And how long did you explain your heart to someone who already decided not to hear it? Choosing not to respond is not apathy, it's protection. It's the understanding that your presence is sacred, that your voice is not an offering for chaos to consume. It's a quiet kind of rebellion against every version of yourself that once begged to be seen. Because now you don't need to be seen to be sure. You don't need to be understood to be whole. Your silence isn't absence, it's presence. Unapologetic, anchored, resolved. The presence of a man who no longer performs for peace. He becomes it, alone if necessary, but never again betrayed by his own voice just to keep someone else from leaving. Zeno didn't find philosophy in a temple. He found it in ruin. Stripped of wealth, adrift in a foreign city, he didn't seek power. He sought clarity. And from that emptiness, a path emerged. That's where you are now. Not broken, but bare. Not lost, but ready. Because the moment you stop negotiating your value in someone else's hands is the moment you begin. None of this was about control. It was never about punishing her, proving a point, or withholding love. It was about remembering what your love is worth, what your energy costs, what your silence protects, and who you become when you stop leaking your spirit just to be allowed to stay. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." You don't get to choose how she felt, or why she pulled away, or what she misunderstood, but you get to choose this, what you answer, what you hold, and what you no longer give. You don't have to roar to reclaim yourself. You don't have to shout to be seen. A lion never explains. He just walks, alone if he must, but never uncertain, never again traded for comfort. Because peace is not found in being chosen. It's found in choosing. Choosing your dignity, your silence, your ground, and standing there, not with anger, but with finality. You are not here to be selected like a product. You are not here to audition for someone's love. You are here to live by a code that says, I remember who I am, I remember what I gave, and I will never again forget the man I became trying to be enough. You don't need her to understand. You don't need a reply. You only need one thing now, to stand, where your voice no longer begs, where your soul is no longer spent, where your silence finally sounds like home.